Welcome back, guys. This should be the last video for my flashcards, video number 9. So we'll get started. Token. Physical or software-based authentication object. Software forms of this object are generated by logon systems such as Kerberos, so that the user do not have to authenticate multiple times. Single sign-on, that is. Hardware version of this object can be a device containing a chip with a digital certificate, but it is more often a device that generates a one-time password. Weak passwords. These are logon credentials that use dictionary words or parts of the username, are not complex, or are too short, like less than 8 characters. Authorization. The process of determining what rights subjects should have on each resource and enforcing those rights. Accounting. The process of tracking authorized and unauthorized usage of a resource or use of rights by a subject. Directory services. These provide general and security information permissions for network users and objects. Most of these are based on the LDAP standard. Implicit deny. This is a basic principle of security stating that unless something has explicitly been granted access, it should be denied access. An example of this is a firewall rule processing, where the last default rule is to deny all connections not allowed by a previous rule. LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. A standard for accessing and updating information in a X.500 style network resource directory. This protocol uses port 389. Unless secure communications are used, this protocol is vulnerable to packet sniffing and man-in-the-middle attacks. It is also usually necessary to configure user permissions on a directory. Version 3 of this protocol supports simple authentication or simple authentication and security layer, which integrates it with Kerberos or TLS. Privilege management. This is the practical application of access control measures. The basic task is to set up and monitor audit resources and users to ensure the user privileges or rights on each resource are correct. The way privilege management is implemented depends on the model of access control being used, discretionary, role-based, or mandatory. Radius, remote authentication dial-in user service. This service was used by the ISPs to authenticate and audit internet access by account holders. This is now also widely used to manage remote and wireless authentication infrastructure. Users supply authentication information to client devices with this service, such as wireless access points. The client device then passes the authentication data to the AA server, which processes the request. SSO stands for Single Sign-On, which is in the system, such as Kerberos, centralizes user authentication in one module, then negotiates with applications on behalf of the user to obtain service tickets. This allows the user to access multiple services with only one logon. Very convenient. TACACS Plus is a terminal access controller access control system. It's an alternative to Radius developed by Cisco. This protocol uses TCP communications over port 49. Distinguished name. A unique identifier for any given resource within an X.500-like directory made up of attribute value pairs separated by commas. LDAP injection attack. An exploitation of a web-based application that builds LDAP statements based on the user input. It occurs when that input is not validated or sanitized, possibly allowing the attacker to return privileged information such as a list of usernames or even passwords. Federation. The notion that a network needs to be accessible to more than just a well-defined group, such as employees. For example, a company might need to make parts of its network open to partners, suppliers, and customers, and likewise have parts of its network open to its staff. Federated identity management. The process of establishing trust relationships in a federation so that a user from one network can be trusted by another network because the first network trusts the user. As well as trust, the network must establish the communications links and protocols that allow users to authenticate and authorized with access permissions and rights. Transitive trust. The trust extends to other trusted domains. For example, if domain A trusts domain B and domain B trusts domain C, then domain A also trusts domain C. Non-transitive trust. The trust relationships remains only between those domains. Security Association Markup Language, as an SAML. Oops. It's an XML-based standard for handling authentication authorization data within a federated network as it transmits between the principal, the service provider, and the identity provider. Shibboleth? That's what how it's pronounced. An open source implementation of SAML that supports the authentication of users, allows users to select preferred identity provider, and processes calls for user authentication by contacting the user's preferred identity provider and processing the authentication request and authorization response. OpenID, the standard for underpinning early sign-on with features of a website. Example of a user-centric version of federated identity management. It also allows to select the preferred identity provider. OAuth stands for as a protocol designed to facilitate this sort of transfer of information or resources between sites. OpenID Connect. A new set of functions and communication flows was added to the OAuth protocol to resolve incompatibility with native mobile applications. Simple Object Access Protocol, also SOAP. Protocol for sending information in the implementation of web services. SAML communications are established using HTTP, HTTPS, and this protocol. By the way, the S stands for secure. Directory Information Tree. Hierarchical database of objects. Access control. Creating one or more barriers around a resource such that only authenticated users can gain access, and only a certain level, such as being able to read the file but not write to it. Account expiration. Some user accounts may be created to allow only temporary access, like for guest users, contractors, temporary staff, and so on. These accounts may be set to revoke access after a certain amount of time, eliminating the possibility that they will be forgotten about and act as possibly system backdoors. Auditing. Windows and other operating systems provide the ability to track system and file access and usage and report this activity to a log file. The system administrator can use this trail to track appropriate or inappropriate access to resources. Continuous security monitoring. Typically, security is only seriously investigated after some sort of incident. Instead, a proactive approach performing risk assessment should be taken, checking audit logs and reviewing threat source continually. This reduces the risk, but requires either a particularly sophisticated intrusion detection system or the manpower to review logs and other security metrics. DAC, discretionary access control. An access control model where a resource is protected by an access control list, ACLs, managed by the resource's owner or owners. Database. These are organized lists of data, usually operated using a structurally query language, SQL. Engines that run these data warehouses are often subject to software exploits, and so should be kept patched. DBA is a database administrator, not Dirtbag Airman. IT role responsible for the configuration, management, and support of database applications. Group account. A collection of user accounts. Sorry, I had a little bit of a cough there. All right. So a collection of user accounts. These are useful when establishing file permissions and user rights because of many individuals that need the same level of access. Group policy. On a Windows domain, this can be used to configure security settings, such as password, policy, account restrictions, firewall status, and so on a per user and per computer basis. Least privilege. That's an important one. A basic principle of security is saying that something should be allocated the minimum necessary rights, privileges, or information to perform its role. Don't give a bunch of access to something that doesn't need it for its job, doesn't have a need to know. Local security policy. A set of policies relating to logon, passwords, etc. that can be enforced or disabled on the local machine. On domains, this is configured centrally using Group Policies Objects, GPO. Logs. Operating system and application software can be configured to maintain a database of events automatically. This provides an audit trail of actions performed on the system as well as a warning of suspicious activity. MAC, also mandatory access control. An access control model where resources are protected by inflexible system-defined rules. Resources, objects, and users, subjects, are allocated a clearance level or a label. Need to know. A basic principle of confidentiality, that is, employees should understand exactly what they should to perform their job and nothing more. Restricting the distribution of information makes it more secure. NFS, Network File System. A remote file access protocol used principally on Unix and Linux networks. Password policy. System-based settings and employee education that are collectively used to inform and instruct employees on how to create secure logon credentials. Permissions. To access files and folders on a volume, the administrator of the computer will need to grant file access to the user or group to which the users belong. These types of access schemes are supported by the NTFS-based Windows system. Role-based access control. An access control model where resources are protected by ACLs. However, management of the access control list is reserved to administrators rather than the owners, and users are assigned permissions according to the job function rather than personally. Rule-based access control. And any access control model that follows system-enforced regulations that cannot be countermanded. Firewall is a good example of this, but the MAC and role-based models can also be described as this type of access control model. SID is a system identifier. The value assigned to an account by Windows, this is the real account identifier as far as the operating system is concerned. The account name is just a convenient label. Time of day restrictions. A condition applied to a user account where the account may only be accessed at prescribed times. This is useful in preventing abuse of the account, especially outside of or, for example, normal business hours. UAC, user account control. A security system in Windows is designed to restrict abuse of accounts with administrative privileges. Actions such as installing hardware and software can be performed without changing accounts, but the user must authorize the use of administrative rights by clicking the prompt and re-entering the user credentials. User access and rights review. This is the process of auditing usage and privileges of users. This may reveal whether privileges are insufficient or too generous. One common problem is rights creep, where a user acquires more and more privileges over time. Another problem is that the disabling expired or unused accounts. User management. The process of controlling user access to resources and performing auditing to ensure appropriate access and privileges. Different access control models, discretionary, role-based, or mandatory are examples of this, can be adopted to suit different networks. Many networks use groups or roles to simplify privilege management. Instead of allocating privileges directly to user accounts, they are allocated to group accounts or roles, and then users placed in the appropriate security groups. And that is it for my slides. Thank you for staying tuned. Hope all these resources are helpful for you guys. Thank you.